Potter out and Nuno in. If you'd have told anyone that, any West Ham fans, any Forest fans, even me, this piece of news just 6 months ago, that would have been crazy. Some sort of unrealistic pipeline dream. But it's happened and Nuno has already made his impact. The first opposition to score at Everton's new blockbuster of a stadium. The lowest XG and lowest amount of big chances a team has generated against West Ham so far this season. But most importantly, a convincing performance. So let's go and talk the tactics behind that convincing performance. So the game had started off with Everton showing much more final third activity than the Hammers, as probably expected, with the first attack for Nuno's side coming in the 7th minute. The first half belonged to Everton with a 1-0 lead, but West Ham was still in there. The second half we witnessed West Ham spawn to life much more, with a clinical Jarrod Bowen strike an hour in. Impressive displays from Freddie Potts off the bench, Crescencio Somerville, Jarrod Bowen and more contributed massively to a dangerous and very encouraging second half performance. Considering Nuno only had one training session with the group, which was a very down group, he did an amazing job. The stats at the end of the match tell you that the game was very evenly matched, that Everton spent much more time in the final third but weren't as effective enough in their aim to create chances, suggesting improvement and a good tactical game plan from Nuno, this early into his tenure. It was a slight clash of playing styles with David Moyes and Nuno Espírito Santo, but let's have a look at what it looked like and that tactical game plan that Nuno put on show. So as we can see on the screen, we've got West Ham in their out of possession shape, and Nuno Espírito Santo, as we know, prefers a 4-4-2 shape out of possession from his time at Nottingham Forest. We know this. It rarely pressed. They would rather use the physical demand in actually moving up the pitch on counter-attacks in transition, as opposed to high pressing and looking to win the ball back. This is much more Moyesy-like. This style translates to David Moyes and his time at West Ham United. Nuno would look to sit in a 4-4-2, compact, tricky shape, and then explosively attack with the wide threats. This wide threat translates across to West Ham. We got Juve here, who is athletically so fast, so explosive off the mark. You have Crescencio Somerville, you have Jarrod Bowen, you have Lucas Paquetá. There's a lot of potential for Nuno to emulate what he did at Forest at West Ham, and it's always that pass on the turnover that is so important. It's from the likes of Mavropanos or Fernandes into the feet of one of the forward three behind the striker, so they can turn forwards and attack open space. That pass was so important for Nottingham Forest. But as we can see, they're in this 4-2-3-1 shape, not a 4-4-2, although it did flirt between that within the second half with Paquetá pushing up, but it was a 4-2-3-1 where Fulkrug looked to stay high, but they didn't exactly press whatsoever. They look to sit within this shape and limit any central progression, which teams have found really easy to progress through this West Ham team. Whenever Everton tried to play out from the back, they were essentially forced into looking for a direct ball because there weren't clear passing patterns through this West Ham team. They looked to move the ball out wide, but that's when the wide proactivity and somewhat press actually came to life in order to force them back through this shape. It was very compact and it did genuinely look very good. If they'd looked for the wide players within Jack Grealish, then Kyle Walker-Peters would jump to life. It was the exact same with Iliman and Dye. Juve would spring to life and look to force them back. Not exactly tackle sometimes, although Kyle Walker-Peters was particularly over-aggressive within that second half, but just forced them back and eventually forced them into a long ball, where ideally they want the two centre-backs to be very dominant against Beto, who had a very wasteful night. It's all about those second balls, and I think with Nuno Espírito Santo, there is so much more encouragement, so much more emphasis on winning those second balls, those little recoveries, those little duels where the ball will be loosely bouncing within this area. It's so important for West Ham to dominate, and I think once they sprung into momentum, they had a bit of confidence about them after they scored, they were winning everything and they were overpowering Everton to a slight, which is crazy because Everton's midfield so far this season has been pretty good. The proactivity in wide spaces was really good. Everybody looked so assured in their roles, which is very, very different to Graham Potter because players were being athletically demanded something that just wasn't capable of them. The likes of James Ward-Prowse, the likes of Thomas Souček were asked to do things that simply they athletically just couldn't do in this day and age. And Freddie Potter in the second half did emulate what Magassa looked to do in the first half really well. But if we progress into the next phase and if we have a look at West Ham from deep shape, this was very interesting. It was a deep 4-5-1. Paquetá would look to drop in here and it was that 5 in midfield. Fulcrum looked to stay high for some sort of threat on the counter-attack, similar to Chris Wood, but I don't think he quite got there. So Everton, again, they're forced out wide. It was a clash of styles because Everton off the ball actually look to force teams out wide, and that's when they are proactive. So Everton in some ways got Evertoned. David Moyes was playing a team that was quite similar to their style. So whenever they looked to move the ball out wide, it was very, very proactive from Kyle Walker-Peters and Juve as well. It was pretty good to see. Everybody again was assured in their roles. They were confident in this 4-5-1 shape, but what Everton looked to do, which was slightly different from what they do within the past, they look to incorporate more on the ball fluidity, more rotational play and more fluidity overall. So Kiernan Dewsbury had a lot of constant movements. Grealish would look to pull apart Kyle Walker-Peters to create space for Mykolenko within this areas, and overall it did work sometimes within that first half, particularly because this is a very confident attack. They're scoring a lot of goals and it was working to a decent level. They were capable, but they didn't quite have the personnel within the fullbacks to pull this off particularly explosively. And one of the biggest weaknesses about this West Ham team is that they've grown into these lazy box defending habits. So when there was a little bit more deeper than this and they were pushed back within their own half, there were little passes into the likes of Kiernan Dewsbury into these spaces where he wasn't quite being picked up very proactively. The centre-backs were very good at those clutch defensive actions where they recovered, but overall they were quite guilty of falling asleep, as you saw in Everton's first goal. And that's okay, it's something that Nuno will hopefully fix. And the centre-back choices obviously are nowhere near as good as Nottingham Forest, but it's something that he will improve, and I think he probably did see enough within this area for improvement to know that he's got something to work with and something truly to build on. Now structurally there was a lot of promise within what we saw for Nuno Espírito Santo. I like the idea of keeping Fulgru high as that bit of an outlet out of possession once they get the ball back, though I do think Callum Wilson with his movements could do a much better job. But the biggest thing for me that was a shift was the mentality. There was a much stronger and greater mentality within the side. If West Ham had conceded that first goal under Graham Potter, it would have been 2, it would have been 3, it would have been 4. But instead, West Ham were actually quite patient off the ball. They were very confident within their game plan, and in the second half, they were the much better team. They were creating chances, they were getting through, and I think you genuinely seen them match one of the most informed teams within the Premier League, within one of the most informed attacks within the Premier League. Although they're missing Jared Branthwaite, probably one of the best defences as well within the league. So they did an excellent job of matching a team that recently has been well out of their hemisphere. Quite as simple as that. Now the midfielders did do very well within this rotational play to track onto the players, but ultimately I think it was the centre-backs where the weaknesses were starting to crack a little bit, where they were getting through. But again, this is something that can be improved, that will be improved, and overall, as a starting foundation, West Ham did do very well. The 4-5-1 adds so much more security than a 4-4-2, which I think they will genuinely shift into, which the confidence is a little bit more high. It's something that David Moyes did at Everton. He had more of a 5 at the back with the right winger joining the back line, but once they got a little bit of confidence and momentum about them, he shifted away from that and evolved. So I suspect Nuno will do the exact same thing. It's all about that emphasis on second balls and duels, and I talk about that pass a lot. And when Everton did commit more bodies forward, they look to attack, they look to overload. When you're coming up against a persistent block, that's simply what you need to do at times. But of course, the biggest worry about this is, of course, conceding that transition. And I think West Ham have a lot of potential for that. Jarrod Bowen could be that clinical edge in transition, and I think he's shown it as well. That was his first shot of the night, and bang, he scored. Somerville was isolated 1v1 with O'Brien, and he was rinsing him pretty much every single time. He was doing a fantastic job. Juve was amazing. Juve is incredibly athletic, fast. He's such an amazing sprinter, providing that overlap for Somerville almost instantly. And that could be huge for West Ham, because Nuno Espírito Santo at Nottingham Forest, he had Nico Williams and he had Oliveira. Neither of those are as athletic and explosive as Juve, so this could be an absolute game changer for Nuno Espírito Santo. Kyle Walker-Peters on the overlap a few times was pretty effective, but overall it's that pass into Paquetá that really unleashes them. It's Fernandes progressing with the ball. It's that forward passing that they have within their midfield core that will really unleash that front three and score them, hopefully, a lot of goals, because I think there's so much potential here for that clinical edge that we saw from Nottingham Forest last season. Now, in terms of a build-up shape, it's not something I'm going to discuss very much, because Nuno's side doesn't set up to have so much possession, but it was more of a 4-1-2-3, a 4-3-3 if you like. And although the low build-up phase, shorter passing, it's not something that's massively emphasised, there was clear passing patterns. Consider Graham Potter aimed to have a little bit more control within this West Ham team, to dominate the ball a little bit more. I think I actually saw more from Nuno within this department than him. The profiling and platforming of the players I think was absolutely spot on. Fernandes moving away from the pivot, Paquetá and him sort of drifting around, and then Juve and Kyle Walker-Peters explosively supporting their winger. One of the best things about Juve is that I don't think the winger, the opposition winger, will be able to track onto him very much. He's just so fast, it's going to make it impossible for someone like Ndai to even track onto him. So the opportunity for direct balls to feed off Füllkrug, it is there. He could be that Chris Wood, but personally, from what I've seen of Füllkrug at West Ham, at Borussia Dortmund, and what I've seen of Callum Wilson at West Ham, and of course at Newcastle, I think there's so much more potential for Callum Wilson to do the job instead. Freddie Potts was somebody I was massively impressed by. He's somebody that I actually vouched for under Graham Potter. Graham Potter was physically asking something of his midfield that they couldn't do, yet had a physically athletic midfielder on the bench that he was reluctant to use him. He did a great job last night. He was fantastic. Magassa, the new signing, I think he's got potential. I think he was very shaky within the first 20 minutes, but after that, I think he built upon that and overall added a little bit more security to this side. But I think Potts, maybe partnering him within the midfield for the next game against Arsenal, could be the formula. But so far, so good for West Ham. I'd be excited if I was a West Ham fan. Thank you guys for watching today's video. If you did enjoy, make sure to smash a like and subscribe to the channel. What do you think of West Ham last night, the appointments of Nuno Espírito Santo, and how they will do under him? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.